It is Thursday, August 2nd, 2018, and this is the MMA Beat. Welcome, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas. I appreciate you guys joining us here in our New York City studios. I am with SiriusXM and, of course, MMA Fighting. To my left is Danny Segura, as well, from MMA Fighting, a new addition to the panel. If you guys don't know him, this is a man I've known for a while. I discovered him when I forayed into boxing a little bit, but he covers MMA boxing and pro wrestling for CBS Sports. That's Brian Campbell. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you. So with MMA Beat 200, by the way,
yes,
I feel like Brock getting called in at UFC 200 to raise the rent.
You are definitely not that important.
I got some estrogen blockers just in case. Somebody find Frank Murr. There's a horseshoe I got to pull up.
And at the very end, you know that old saw. It is our friend Chuck Mindenhall from The Ringer, as well as MMAFighting.com. All right, boys, not a moment to waste. It is, in fact, by the way, the 200th episode of this thing. I cannot believe we've done 200 of these. But here we are. This is the 200th one, and we'll take your tweets at the end using the hashtag #TheMMABeat, but we'll get to all that a little bit later. All right, let's start at where we start. UFC 227 is this Saturday. Seems like it's probably going to bomb on pay-per-view. That's just a feeling that I have. I don't have any crystal ball. But, Danny, I'll start with you with one of the more, I think, interesting storylines. Cody Garbrandt is out here. Mm-hmm. He went to the open workouts yesterday and chose not to work out. Now, he was not the only one. Henry Cejudo also didn't work out. Although I was told there's only 4 people there. Half of them didn't work out. Now, they did do a fan Q&A, which is something, of course. But it wasn't even that I was focusing on. That was kind of emblematic of what has been happening this whole time. He has not been talking at all. Now, we spoke last week. Joanna Jędrzejczyk did the same thing, did not speak very much, and then she went out there and looked pretty good against Tecia Torres. What do you make of Cody Garbrandt's silence?
I mean,
relative silence.
Just, I believe last Monday or the Monday before, you were mentioning how we're demanding too much from these fighters. And these fighters are focusing too much on media and getting out there and promoting their fights. And that leaves them, you know, not worrying too much about the actual fighting, which is what gets them the money, gets them the title shots, and gets them where they need to be. So I think they're starting to realize that. They're starting to realize that they're spreading themselves too thin, and they got to start worrying about what matters, which is fighting. So, and I'm completely fine with that. And especially given the fact that this is a very important fight for him, you know, he's got to focus on what he's got to focus, and that's fighting.
Boys?
I think the word silence is key in this spot, because silence for UFC 227, nobody's talking about it. I think for a lot of reasons. Does this undercard suck?
Two-way thing.
You know, son of a bitch, Kohea, you better believe this one is not good. And for Cody, I think this is more purposeful, because if you look at what happened in that first fight, it really comes down to it. I think mentally he just wasn't focused. He just wasn't where he had to be.
He was also injured.
And look, that injury is valid. Just like, hey, Dominic Cruz being injured ahead of his Cody Garbrandt fight is certainly valid in that case. But I think if you're really going to blame something for that loss, I think you have to say mentally. He got worked into a shoot, if you will.
Oh, here we go.
TJ Dillashaw knew there was a button to press to get Cody off of his game. We didn't see the same Cody from the Cruz fight, who was 5 rounds, focused, poised, patient. We saw a guy a little bit more emotional, a little bit more ready to play out that grudge they had, play out the pro wrestling angle inside the cage, prove his manhood. I think TJ, they say styles make fights. I think personalities make fights. This time around, he's much more focused, Cody. A lot like Joanna was, by the way, heading into that second fight.
The common thread there is that these guys are coming off of losses. I can actually understand that, because we see so many people return in diminished forms after a loss, especially people that like might have seemed invincible. We were feeding into their invincibility. We're trying to put a star quality on them. Cody Garbrandt was one of those guys. I think a lot of people had him pegged to kind of be the next, I don't know about John Jones, but a strata of star that was a little bit distinguished from your normal star. Like a guy that,
remember, he had the campaign where he was considered to be Fighter of the Year.
Exactly. Right? So, and then, you know, he actually has a moment in that fight where it looks like he can end it, but it's right at the end of the first round. So then he gets kicked in the head, and then he loses that fight. There was a lot to process. He's a seething, brooding competitor, you know, and I think that these people, Joanna's the same way. It's just losing doesn't really compute to competitors like that, and I think that they turn a little more internal to try to dig that back up for their next fight. I completely understand being a little more quiet.
So there's 2 theories whenever somebody does this, when they go quiet during a camp and then they do very, very little media. There's always 2 theories about this, especially when they don't work out, because that always adds to the conspiracy theories, which is that, one, everything everyone's saying here. They are internalizing the loss. They want to make sure they leave no stone unturned. They're as focused and as dialed in, and I can believe that in Cody's case, right? The other theory is that something is wrong. They're injured. They're unhappy. There's just some kind of problem that we don't know about. Here's my question. I'll put it to the table. Whoever wants to jump on this grenade first, which is, how can you tell the difference? Until the fight, we have 2 competing theories for the same action. how can you tell the difference?
Vegas stays alive with this question, doesn't it? It's like if somebody would try to read into a situation, you're like, well, I think that there's something wrong there. It's all hunches. But honestly, man, you have to follow these fighters' careers. I think for Cody Garbrandt and Joanna Jędrzejczyk, you know, you look at both of them, they hate talking about losing. I mean, they just don't want to lose. I really believe that's my initial reaction. Now, if we go through this fight and then he divulges that he had some kind of injury or something, we're going to go right back to the same thing. But honestly, man, knowing the kind of competitor, I'm sure you guys have talked to both these guys before. I just think that's who they are. I don't think they want to talk. It's just like the Ronda thing, but maybe dialed back a bit. They play the game a bit, but they just don't want to talk about their losses. And
you have to believe, not talking about this fight, not playing into the TJ trash talking war, certainly not helping people realize this fight is actually happening. I mean, this is an LA summer pay-per-view. That used to mean something. That used to mean Ronda Rousey. This fight is fantastic. I can't wait for it. I'm fired up. I'm a greasy hardcore, right? To get those casuals involved.
I rewatched the first fight just a couple days ago, and that got me fired up. It's almost like you want the UFC to say, like, just lay it down, like, watch the first fight again. You know, just watch the first fight.
People have told me, like, do you really want to see a third fight? I'm like, well, let's see how the second one looks. But if the second one looks like the first, fuck and yes. Wow. How could you not want to see a third one?
Wow.
I think stylistically, like, obviously these two are great fighters, and the beef is there, so the fight is amazing within itself. But just the drama and the beef, it has prolonged for so long that I'm kind of fed up with it. I kind of want to see this move on and maybe pick up the trilogy if it does play out for Cody, maybe down the line. But I can definitely sense some fatigue as far as their beef goes.
See, I want more beef. I always want more beef, but seriously.
I hear you, but I had Cody on my show. Remember he had a book out recently. He was promoting it. He came through my studio, and I asked him, I was like, be real, Cody. You're kind of tired of the beef. He was like, you know what? For real, I'm tired. I'm tired. Like, it weighs on you. There's a time when you can have beef and it propels you. Like that Daniel Cormier, John Jones beef, it brings out, as we've talked about before, the worst, but also the best.
But go ahead. The thing about that beef is that there's so many layers to it. Daniel Cormier winning the heavyweight title, John Jones getting suspended. There's so many new layers to it that it stays fresh. Literally, the TJ Dillashaw and Cody Garbrandt beef has been the same for the last year. It's really been the same thing. You left Team Alpha Male, this and that. You know, you traded.
It's based off one fact that they had a dispute over.
And it's been the exact same thing. So there are no new layers to this.
Well, the new layer, the evolution, really is just after the fight, the disrespect to the corner and the yelling in his face, the disrespect after the fight.
But even that,
so those are the layers they put on.
I don't know. You want a new layer? Play the knockout. Play TJ jumping in his face. There's a new layer for me. Maybe I'm easy to be goaded into trash talk situation, but I don't understand why this fight has not become a marketing gem. I get that TJ's not a pay-per-view star. I get where we are in this pay-per-view era. I get that we just had 226 less than a month ago in Calgary, a loaded top-end main card last week, but I don't understand why no one's talking about this fight. Why outside of tight MMA circles, I'm not seeing any.
I don't know why you're so surprised by this. Let's think about this for a second. There's something that Bellator uses and other organizations use it as well. It's called a Q rating, literally the letter Q. And what they do is there's this algorithm, and it's a proprietary one. We don't know exactly how they put it together, but it's been pretty reliable for the companies that use it. And what they try to do is they basically try to measure what is your popularity. Right, and there's a lot of different mechanisms by which they do that. But one of the reasons why Rampage was so important for Bellator when they initially signed him was he had a very high Q rating relative to other MMA stars. Let's be serious about this. TJ and Cody is an incredible fight. I am I cannot wait, because I think once those two start getting introduced, all the fans are like, do I really want to see a third fight? They're going to start feeling it, man. But is the main? Forget the rest of the card. Is there anyone on the main and co-main who has a high Q rating? No.
Yeah.
So why would you expect this fight to be
Well, they could, though, because...
Does he have a high Q rating?
Man,
he had a high Q rating when he was in the Olympics.
It's true.
You know, last year when the narrative was UFC's out of stars, who's next? And everybody's writing those stories. Cody obviously was top of that list.
Got the 217 derailment.
Yeah. For sure. But how about UFC says, well, maybe Dillashaw's a thing. I know he's 32. I know maybe he's not a prototype guy you can market. But they used to market Renan Barao and try to say he's the best fighter in the world, pound for pound.
I believe the word was monster.
I mean, seriously, why? If there's anybody less promoted who's an elite fighter than TJ Dillashaw, is it maybe Nate Diaz, maybe Tyron Woodley? I don't understand why TJ, he had to wait 2 years to get the rematch that Cody Garbrandt is getting when he didn't even have a title defense as a champion. That's really telling you something on who's being favored, who's being coveted here. Yeah, I don't even think Cody's getting pushed anymore. I feel like they want to step back and say, let's wait and see what happens.
I feel like Cody just getting the rematch automatically is kind of them pushing him in a weird way, because, I mean, you know, TJ Dillashaw, I think that UFC brass deep down is like, I don't know if they believe he has an it factor. As good as he is, I don't think that they believe he will ever sell, to be honest. I mean, it's just you look at kind of his track record, the fights he's been in. I just don't think he generates. I remember when he was fighting Dominic Cruz, to me that was an amazing thing to contemplate going in, and yet I don't think the numbers were that great for that either, right? Maybe you would know better.
No, but it was forgivable in the sense that this was a guy on the come up.
True, that's true. But I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I just feel like TJ Dillashaw is not somebody the UFC believes is going to be a star for them. But I think they still think that Cody Garbrandt can be.
Well, a couple things. So this is why I want to transition to the next topic, or at least inside of this space, which is, what does TJ get with a win? Now, a couple things, right? More money, I suppose. Gets to keep the belt, right? Bragging rights, those kinds of things. But let's look past that. Chuck, I'll start with you. In terms of, like, I don't know, legacy or big opportunities, what's the real big, sweet pot of gold, metaphorically speaking, that he gets with a win here?
Small picture, he gets competitive distance from his chief rival. I think that he puts him away for good. If he beats him again, they'd never fight again. I mean, it would have to be pretty remarkable circumstances for them to fight a third time if it's 2-0. So I think that that's the big thing he gets out of this, is he can just basically turn the page on this guy. If he loses, obviously, that introduces you're talking about beef fatigue. They're going to be going through it again at some point. So, that's what I think he is a competitor. TJ Dillashaw is one of those fiery guys. You hear about him in the gym and his training, and he's just one of those guys, you know, they always call him kind of a dick, or he's a cocky guy, because I think that it means stuff to him to show up every time, even in private, and show himself to do. So I think that competition, just putting Cody Garbrandt, a guy that he doesn't like, you know, in the rear view, and that would mean something to him.
Right. So let me, or actually, either of you can answer this. Let me pitch it in this way. What I'm meaning is, you mentioned competitive distance, right? Where does it put him all time at bantamweight?
I think it legitimizes him, because if you look at how he got his belt, he beat Renan Barão, and look at what Renan Barão has done since. That hasn't, you know, done TJ any favors. The fact that Renan Barão hasn't had the best career post TJ Dillashaw.
TJ could take his soul, though, Danny. Let's be honest.
No, yeah, he put up completely great performance. But I mean, Renan Barão, if he were destroying people out there, we'd be talking about how good TJ Dillashaw is, right? Also, he defended his belt against Joe Soto. I'm not sure if he's still in the UFC. I'm not entirely sure, but
situation at that point.
Yeah, I understand. No, I understand the circumstances. I understand the circumstances, but the fact is, he defended the belt against somebody making their UFC debut, against somebody that perhaps is not UFC championship caliber. And then he has that split decision with Dominic Cruz, you know, which
was very tight.
Which was very tight, but you know, he doesn't feel like he feels like he's a very skilled guy, but he hasn't had the wins necessary to legitimize his career. Now, he beat Cody Garbrandt. That's something. If he can beat him twice, that'll definitely put him as one of the best.
Yeah. Well, he's the most underrated elite fighter from a performance sense. I mean, if he's not number 3 or better on your pound-for-pound list, I'll have this argument. I don't think you should have a list.
Okay, number 1, because DJ?
Number 1's got to be DJ.
2?
And then 2, you know, if you're going to make the Cormier argument, at this point, I think we're going to say yeah.
And you'd put TJ right behind?
I put TJ right behind him, because, look, I didn't think he lost to Assuncio. I didn't think he lost to Dominic Cruz, and at very worst would have deserved a rematch. So what does he gain from this? I think if we believe, or if I believe, because I made the comments, that UFC might be stepping back, maybe they didn't push this fight promotion-wise like they could have, because they want to say, who's coming out of this? Are we getting a trilogy fight? Does Cody still have a chance to be our next guy? Or do we have to decide to make a move with TJ? TJ's going to get that opportunity with the win, hopefully, where they'll say, okay, let's pitch him as a pound-for-pound guy. He spars with Vasily Lomachenko, the boxing pound-for-pound king wizard. Let's pitch him as maybe our new pound-for-pound king in waiting, because he fights with a unique style. Let's give him that opportunity, because, like we said, not getting that rematch, waiting 2 years, having to come back around when Cody slides right in those DMs. You saw what they think about TJ. Guys, wake up. TJ's really, really good, and if he wins this fight, give him the push.
That is an interesting thought. I don't think that they try to push him as pound-for-pound guy, especially if DJ wins this weekend. I mean, we'll get to him in just a minute. I think the other thing that gives him here is a competitive space. Maybe they try to push him as pound-for-pound great, certainly in a more direct way. But also, I think it would essentially force Demetrius Johnson's hand. It would force the UFC's hand.
Yeah.
I think, true or false, Danny, I'll start with you on this one. True or false, if TJ wins, let's say in a relatively similar fashion to the way in which he beat Cody the first time, more or less, something like that, that the UFC will have no choice but to make a TJ-DJ fight. I think, of course, assume TJ wins.
False.
Well. False. Okay, why?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Daniel Cormier, Stipe Miocic, that was heavyweight allure, you know, big fight, and how to do on pay-per-view. Not so great, and the UFC still has to write out a check for both those guys and pay them for
I really dispute this notion he didn't do well. Hold on, let me make my
The era has changed. The landscape
very quickly,
changed.
very quickly, because I want to make sure you finish your point. What's the best Stipe Miocic pay-per-view outside of CM Punk UFC debut, not on there, in terms of what he has had against another headliner? Against Daniel Cormier, that's far and away his best. So to me, it's like the upper bound limit of what somebody like Stipe Miocic can pull.
But it still didn't do well. It wasn't like a super successful pay-per-view.
Yes, it didn't hit conventional thresholds. I'm just saying.
Right.
I just did a little bit.
Okay, yeah, maybe successful in Stipe's standards, but what about in money standards, in business-wise? Was it a good business move? Did it do well?
I like a fired up Segura right
not
here.
so
I
much.
like this.
Yeah,
I
thank
like
you.
this.
So now you get TJ Dillashaw and Demetrius Johnson, which are fantastic fighters, but they're smaller guys. They're not nearly as recognizable as Daniel Cormier and Stipe Miocic. And what, you're going to pay them a lot of money, keeping in mind that one of the biggest heavyweight fights ever didn't do that well? What's a flyweight fight going to do? Probably not so much. And we know Demetrius is not going to fight him unless they pay him well. So is it worth it for the UFC to take out their checkbook, pay a lot of money for those two guys, and will it do well on pay-per-view? Keeping in mind how UFC 226 did, I don't think so.
It absolutely is worth it, Danny, because here's why. You just made your own argument. Featherweight fight DJ against anybody else, nobody cares. Right now,
flyweight, you mean?
Flyweight. Right now, unless they push Dillashaw if he wins, Dillashaw fight against next bantamweight in line, a Sun Xiao. Nobody really cares, right? To be honest.
Now, they could do a Cruz rematch.
Right.
Excuse me.
They could, but the whole point is UFC's far past now. They are in sell their soul mode. They said we wouldn't make champion against champion, right? Pettis and Aldo, we're not going to do that. We learned our lesson with BJ versus the rematch with GSP. Now we're in sell our soul mode. It has to be champion versus champion every fight. It has to be interim title every fight. Every fight's got to matter. Yeah, it's not going to move big things, but if you're going to get the most out of DJ from a marketing sense, and if Demetrius is going to say, you know what, I'm going to take my swing to not be at the table of the greatest of all time. And by the way, this table sitting with you guys right now. Wow, right?
Yes.
But to be the guy, you've got to be a guy. You've got to take a chance and move up. That's sellable in my mind. DJ's not sellable in other situations.
You think
but him
TJ
moving up in weight against TJ, it's sellable. It's not GSP. It's not GSP and Conor McGregor.
Do you think DJ is bigger than Stipe DC?
I say it could be on par, marketed a certain way.
That seems a little ambitious.
I'm a very ambitious person. So here's
the point about that, though. It's a little ambitious, I think. However, I am of the belief, and this is certainly debatable, but I'm of the belief, Chuck, that I do think TJ would be a very interesting test for DJ, even at 125.
It would be a fantastic fight.
I'm not saying that.
To me, it's not just about what kind of money it does. We already talked about DJ's legacy, which we'll get to in just a second, how big it is. I do think that if he fights TJ and beats him, boy, that is a very meaningful win.
I just think there'd be mutiny if DJ keeps winning and he doesn't do something like that. At some point, we always talk about like cleaning out a division. He's on the second time cleaning out his division. He's having to recycle the same names because he's done this before. I think at some point you've got to, from the competitive standpoint especially, and this is a fan-driven sport, you've got to meet what the fans are looking for in this situation. So the bottom line is, what does everybody want at this point from DJ? Let's say he goes right through Cejudo this time. What does everybody want from him? There's nobody right now in the flyweight ranks that would make sense for him. So it's you got to do something there. You know what I mean? They got to figure out the money aspect. They have to do that. The only way that he kind of turns the corner without actually taking on a negative, a shroud of, like the people. I feel like there's already that a little bit with him, but it's going to get worse if he doesn't take on somebody like that. I really believe that this is the one. If he beats Cejudo, the fans are going to want to see him. They want to see it at this point.
Demetrius Johnson could care less what the fan. He's made it pretty clear. He's made it pretty clear. Look, if they're going to pay me, good, I'll fight them. If not, I'll just keep defending my title. That's my job. He's made it pretty clear. So the question is, does the UFC think a TJ-DJ fight is worth enough to pay those guys, big money?
I'll tell you how you market it. It's very easy.
ESPN.
The winner is the pound-for-pound king, and if DJ wins, he might be the best ever. I know it's hyperbole. True. Hyperbole moves product and sells fights. And then give a co-main of some guys that bring some action. I mean, this could work.
I mean, DJ has been in the conversation for pound best for a long time, and they're putting him on Fox shows.
But they haven't really put him in with somebody who fans believe can beat him. To be really
that's true. Also, the doubt, as what we talked about before, they have not introduced doubt to him.
And it can't be a flyweight. So let's get that out of the equation. You cannot do TJ-DJ at flyweight.
Sure you can.
You cannot, and you should not do it. It has to be at bantamweight. It has to be the champion.
I'd actually argue it's a much better fight at flyweight.
You're crazy. You're absolutely crazy.
I don't think
he is crazy.
That is true.
I was cage side when Dominic Cruz fought Demetrius Johnson. I don't want a repeat of that where TJ just essentially out wrestles him because he's a naturally bigger guy. guy.
It's a different DJ, though. You know this,
I understand. It's a different TJ. I understand that. And TJ's not Dominic Cruz, but he has all of the same kinds of tools to present all the same kinds of challenges with a significant weight advantage, which that would probably be. At 125, you kind of negate some of that a little bit.
But historically, you lose the luster if TJ's got to cut down to a division that he doesn't fight in and hasn't.
You also don't have to worry about giving up a title. Well, I guess you would either way. But the point being is, to me, I think you can just make a better argument for him going down. You could always do a rematch, a weight class up. And the other point is, we've looked at some of the numbers on the ESPN deal. If they have because you have the 10 shows that go on ESPN or ESPN2, you know, like they did for UFC on Fox, they made a big splash, right? Kane versus JDS, right? You could do a TJ DJ, not put it on pay-per-view. That would be heavily hyped by ESPN, and that is the one vehicle, not pay-per-view. I have found with the UFC these days is a super bad vehicle for storytelling. Other than Jones Cormier or something, they just don't tell the story very well. On ESPN for the first show, it fits right into the calendar. Yeah. Boy, you could do something big with that, Chuck.
Good point. That's a good point. I also think that just the 125, because of the streak, and presuming he gets by Cejudo and this match was made, it matters. It would matter. It would suddenly come into light in a way that it hasn't been there before. We know that he broke Anderson Silva's record, but it almost went off with no bells and whistles. I mean, it was just really more of an insider thing. The diehards really knew it. I felt like the casual people had no idea. A lot of people probably still don't know about that. I think that becomes a big deal if there's a guy like that, another champion coming to face him at 125 pounds.
Let me make my one more 135 point, all right? Maybe he doesn't care about it, but we do. We're kind of lame. We're fans and journalists that just debate this stuff. In the greatest of all time argument, we always are going to hold against DJ to a certain degree that he was in a division that's not that sexy, that he doesn't have wins over gigantic names, and that he didn't move product. He didn't touch our hearts the way GSP and Anderson Silva did. The only thing to get him to that chance to be that guy, to where you can finally go, well, he's not just at the table, he might be the guy, is to be the champ. It's the trendy thing right now. If he joins that conversation with DC and Conor, he's got a better resume than the three of them at that point, in my mind, all things considered.
I actually think you can make a strong argument now that doing what he's done is actually harder than division jumping. But it's a separate debate for a separate time. Any other final thoughts on what's on the line for DJ here this weekend? Anyone have any additional commentary? No? All right, so that brings us to the last part of the co-main and main event, which is Henry Cejudo. I have to say, I'm certainly not rooting against DJ. I'm not rooting for Cejudo. But, Danny, you have to wonder, wouldn't you like to at least peek through the curtain and see the chaos that would ensue if Henry Cejudo wins?
I mean, it mixes things up, and he even said it himself. It changes things up. We've been accustomed to watching just DJ just run through guys over and over, and up to one point it gets kind of boring, but he mixes it up, and he makes it somewhat fun with the crazy arm bars and whatnot. But I mean, it does change things up, and it does change the conversation. And then where does that put Cejudo, And where does he go next? So it's definitely, it would change things up and make things interesting. But I would agree, I would say that ultimately Demetrius Johnson winning makes everything most exciting, because all of a sudden you got really one of the pound-for-pound kings, and what is he going to do next?
Make a weird argument here, because I say weird things already. I've established that.
We've noticed.
A loss for Johnson against Cejudo and a chance to beat him in a trilogy could be the best thing for his long-term legacy and how we remember him, because it would humanize him. That's one thing that Floyd Mayweather didn't have. He beat the game in boxing. He made us all hate him and wanted to see him lose. But he was never human. He was human outside the ring, never human inside of it. It would give DJ a chance to have his GSP, Matt Serra moment and dig deep and come back from something. And it would certainly give some juice to the flyweight division that we're talking about. Doesn't move the needle. Doesn't move my needle.
I just know one thing. All the captives at flyweight that are basically sitting under the Joseph Benavidez, and we saw Ian McCall leave the game basically without ever getting back there, but there's so many people in that 125-pound division who are just basically stuck in traffic. They'll never get back to where they wanted to be. If there's a Cejudo upset, that gives life to the whole division again, because everybody has then a chance to get back into that spot.
DJ is literally out there talking like, I wish I could go to other organizations and beat their flyweight, because he's so fucking bored with everyone that's around him. And that's not these are great fighters that are around him, but they're just stuck with this guy in this division who's the king of all kings.
I always feel like he's always planting a little something in there too. That's with the UFC.
Yeah.
You know him, he's a smart guy, mentioning Bellator and a conference like that and stuff. So,
by the way, did we forget that Dana threatened to get rid of the flyweight division like within the last calendar year publicly?
It's a bit of a separate point. I've often wondered if that's not a decent idea for a separate point. But okay, hold on. Let me go back to you, Brian, because you have a big ego and career in boxing, and you've covered a lot of the Latin market and how much it is important. I had Henry Cejudo on the MMA Hour on Monday, 2 Mondays ago, And he said, if I can win a title, I can cross two worlds. I can be that Latin American star. I want to get your opinion, of course, on this as well. But from your vantage point, is that a real thing? I mean, Olympic gold medalist, you know, has this immigrant story, speaks fluent Spanish.
It's certainly real-ish. It would be the best chance to do that. He would have a chance to do things that Cain Velasquez was obviously never able to do because he couldn't talk, didn't have that personality, had the injury history that kept him out. The messenger is a little bit cocky. He can talk. The Olympic thing is great. And it happened in this country. We love that. It's an Oscar de la Hoya reboot if they did it right. Would it really work? Would it really open up the doors to the Hispanic market? I don't know. I think it would be that best chance, though. Better than coming in with a wrestling mask and trying to really cheese it up.
What do you think, Danny?
I don't know if it'll be, you know, life-changing for the UFC, but it would definitely open doors. Just his story is so incredible, and there's so many people in the U.S. that have gone through the same thing that he's gone through. You know, moved to this country, worked hard, start from the very bottom, and look where he's at now. And it's such an inspiring story, and there's millions of Hispanic Americans here in the U.S. that can relate to him, and he speaks English fluently, and he speaks Spanish fluently as well, and that's a culture within itself, because there's Hispanics that live in Hispanic countries, and there's Hispanics that live in the U.S., and there are differences.
Yeah.
And then he speaks to that, which not, you know, we've seen media outlets just rise just to cater that audience. You know, that is a very big audience that Henry Cejudo can capture, and way better than Cain Velasquez, to be honest. When Cain Velasquez started, and I interviewed him, he barely spoke Spanish, and he got better over time. But you know, he's not that so outspoken, and you know, I think Cejudo is can literally cater.
Yeah, that sounds like a made-for-TV movie. We'll get AC Slater to play him. I love this.
AC Slater back in the game. I do think that market, we've talked about the Mexican market before and Latin American market, like it's not tapped. I still feel like it's out there, you know, and I feel like that he's a perfect, people could probably relate to him. There's going to be a lot more people could relate to him. I don't think Cain Velasquez was the guy either. Ultimately, I think they were banking on more. He's a heavyweight and he's fighting these big glamour.
Cain Velasquez, it looked to me, if you look at the Lesnar fight, was great for the demo that the Hispanics that are already here, second generation Chicanos, the ones that grew up here. It's the ones over there. I don't know what kind of connection he really had in the end. I will say, though, about Henry Cejudo, I one time saw him, God, what was it? It was like, not the Latin Grammys, but some kind of Latin, Latin ESPYs or something like that. And Pau Gasol came out, and Henry had just won the Olympics, and they had given him an award. And he came out in Spanish and goes, "Oh, I want to thank everybody, blah, 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 blah." And he goes, "And by the way, ladies, I am single." Like, can you imagine Cain Velasquez getting on stage at an award show after Pau Gasol introduced him and saying, "I'm single"?
Well, I think he's married, but
you understand what I'm saying? Like, just the presence of mind. Just the presence of mind to get out there and do that. Cool. It's pretty crazy.
Cool.
All right, so enough of that. 227 will be this weekend. Let's get into some of the other headlines that happened this week inside the sport. Let's see, people. They calling me. Conor McGregor, his issues are behind him. And we talked a little bit about that, but here's what he said.
26 minutes in.
26 minutes. Yeah, not bad, right?
Not bad, yeah, pretty good.
I mean, it's just like you got to pay the tax at this point. All right, so here's what we know. Not much other than we've already discussed what happened about the legal issues, but now he tells TMZ, after they called him the King of New York, that he is almost done with the deal and that it looks like it's going to be in Vegas and not New York City. I have to say, Chuck, I find that highly disappointing. Am I making a mountain out of a molehill?
I personally would have liked it in New York because we're right here, you know what I mean? But at the bottom line is...
You are so lazy. It's outrageous.
I refuse to travel to Los Angeles. No, I'm just kidding. Ultimately, it doesn't matter to me, man. I kind of figured it would be between those two before really kind of hearing that. So to me, it really doesn't matter. But I think that if they're putting it at that end of the year show, it's been a little while. I know they had the Rousey fight, you know, against Nunez, but I feel like it's been a while since there's been a truly big, you know, end of the year show. So if they're going to do that, that would be a nice way to close out a year in which his absence was truly felt. You know what I mean? I feel like this was a year that we saw a lot of low numbers, and we've talked a lot about that. It would be a nice way to close it out, and especially going into the new era of the ESPN era and everything else to kind of go out on that note.
It's a great point. And last time I checked, he has millions of tax reasons to do it in Vegas, correct? I mean, that's true.
I mean, I don't know if I'm being too cheesy and I'm reading too much into the storyline, but the whole bus thing happened here in Brooklyn, and that was a big part of it. Him coming back and forth to New York all the time. I was at the courthouse, you know, every single time that Conor was there. There's something to that. There was something in the air that happened here in Brooklyn. Here, well, we're in Manhattan, but the fact that it happened in New York City, there was something about it. And for them to fight here when the whole incident happened here, I think there's something to that.
You know, too, if it happens in New York City, there's going to be a nice Russian delegation to show up and support him. I think that would have been a lot of fun because we know that Conor's fans travel. I think we would have probably seen a real cross-pollination there.
It's easier to travel to New York than Vegas.
I think the Irish they'll go to Vegas. I have no doubt the Irish will be there in full force. But I also know that if it was in New York, they'd be a lot happier to come here. They look, the Irish, I don't want to speak for them, but it feels like when I was here for 205, they look at New York like a second home. They love New York City. Who doesn't? But the Irish really seem to take to it. I thought that would have been huge. And I think you're right. The whole story has been about
played
New York.
out here.
It's a New York drama. You got to finish the beef in New York. You can always take a fight to Las Vegas. I'm sure it will do quite well, you know, in the end. But I kind of thought, like, really, they're going to move that to Vegas? That kind of
I mean, all the footage of him throwing the dolly and everything, I mean, it all happened in New York. And, you know, you can see it in the background.
I agree.
You just roll that out, and it's just part of the whole story.
I mean, here is something you can't understand. He almost just killed a man.
Cypress Hill.
And we're just going to forget that happened? You know, like, I know I probably had this debate on the show, and I don't want to stand on the moral soapbox and be that guy. And I understand.
That was 197. That was 3 shows.
I know, and I understand why the guys who move numbers get the privileges.
Well, you think Bob Arum would do Jack S if Conor McGregor was one of his fighters? Please be serious.
You gotta put out a public front at least, right? You gotta at least tease. What if you're gonna lie to me? You gotta tease me.
This is MMA, where fighters have Nazi tattoos and people don't care. You think they care about him chucking a dolly at a bus? They don't care at all.
But it wasn't an accident. I mean, I know we're just, you know, I know.
Wait, the dolly didn't slip out of his hand?
No.
No, he actually released it into the wild. Other key point about
he paid his price. He was going to do some community service and anger management.
Oh, Dana said that. That's right. Sorry.
And he had to pay for the bus. He had to pay for the bus.
We've already get into this. I want to get into that part, but I will go to you, Brian, on this one. Habib Nurmagomedov's manager, Ali Abdelaziz, is saying that there is no chance in hell that the champion, Habib Nurmagomedov, is going to fight McGregor for anything less than what Nate Diaz got. Now, in the end, I don't know what Nate Diaz got, but his public purse, for whatever that was worth, was $2 million. True or false? Habib gets the same thing.
Oh, Habib absolutely has to get the same thing because we all know this is a $2 million buy pay-per-view, and it will be the first in UFC and MMA history. UFC has the footage of the dolly. They're going to use it to promote it. This will be the absolute grudge match of the century. I think the more interesting conversation that maybe we're looking past too quickly is what the heck is Conor McGregor going to make when he made $100 million against Floyd? He's not going to accept the, I'll take 3 up front and you'll pay me 12 on the back end. I mean, it's got to be 5 years ago, Manny Pacquiao, Floyd Mayweather in between fight money, where it's 20 to 40 guaranteed, no questions asked, correct?
40 guarantee in the UFC, you won't see that in our lifetime.
Then you may not see it.
You might see 10 to 15 guaranteed. I'll bet almost anything you don't see 20 million guaranteed.
There is a desperation in the air with the UFC and all those interim belts and all these champ versus
Which is also funny because I remember when like Canelo or whoever, all these big fights I've covered, because I've only ever covered the big ones in boxing, and when you would see these, I remember when Floyd was backstage at the Howard Theater, and it was Dan Rayfield, your former colleague, he was standing there, he was like, Floyd, how much is this purse? He goes, 20, and Floyd went like this, he went, and he goes, 30, he like winked at Danny, went like this, he goes, 40? This was, of course, long before Mayweather Pacquiao, and he goes, and he was like, it's 41. And I sat there in the Howard Theater.
That was the guarantee for the Canelo.
That was the guarantee. And I sat there being like, holy Jesus, how is that possible? It makes for great publicity. It speaks to the size of the fight itself. But I think the UFC is a little afraid of like, I don't know. If this guy's making 20, why can't I make 10? You know?
But are we
They've already let the cat out of that bag so long ago, man. But the whole everything Conor McGregor does is set new precedents for all these other people to be disgruntled about.
Are we too quick though to look past the? Because they asked Conor, it's going to be in this calendar year, and he's like, you know, I hope. And his manager, not Ali, Audi says, you know, I hope it's this calendar year. Are we looking too quick by that? If they don't give him that money, it may not be this calendar year.
It's an interesting question to ask. It's not the one I'm focused on for just the moment. Chuck, real quickly, does Habib make the same kind of money as Nate?
I think he does. What was the part 2? What was the sequel pay-per-view number?
I think it was 2.2.
2.2, yeah.
So, I mean, I honestly believe it's going to beat that. So I believe, why wouldn't you? I think that's the size of this fight. So I think he does make that, yeah. I think the UFC will recognize that pretty quickly.
I think he might make a little more because I think this fight is way bigger than the Diaz one. This has been in the making for a long time. The Diaz one was sort of this fun thing that kind of got cobbled together and then it turned into something. This already has the storyline. We just need to fight at this point. So I think he makes more, and I know, you know, I just want to make a quick point. I know Ali gets a lot of hate, but man, the promos that he cuts, he's one of the best managers, I would say, in the business.
Crazy.
And by the way, to close on not punishing Conor, you have given him the power in the negotiations by not punishing him within the company.
He has total impunity.
Now he did that offense and used it to his advantage, and now he's
Another
the
precedent.
one. I'm not there in the negotiation rooms, but he's the one driving the truck right now.
Yeah, he really is. Now, that brings us to a former Conor McGregor rival in Max Holloway. Max Holloway spoke this week to our former colleague, Ariel Helwani, over at ESPN. And I don't know what to make of what he said, you know? Because here's what he basically said in a nutshell. I'm doing better, which, of course, is great news. I'm feeling better. I definitely will fight again. Okay. But we don't really know what happened. Danny, are you as alarmed as I am?
That is very scary. I mean, if you look at that Michael Bisping interview, and I think you were one of the first ones to point out on Twitter, you're like, oh,
the
man.
one from Fight Week.
Right.
When Max was out of it.
He looked off. Like, you're like, what's going on? And you want to know what's going on. Like, there's something wrong with this guy. And then all of a sudden, he starts feeling better. And then he's like, yeah, I don't know what happened. And then all of a sudden, he wants to return the same year and wants to, you know, defend his belt and make that drastic weight cut to 145, and yet we still don't know what happened. That is alarming. I was all in for the Brian Ortega Max Holloway fight. I'm like, I got robbed off the Habib Tony Ferguson. I cannot get robbed from this one. I want to see it, fight it, and then move to 155. At this point, not knowing what happened, don't take the risk, man. Just go up to 155.
What do you think, Brian?
This is scary. I think we can't fast forward too quickly with the question of will he ever fight again? Because when you don't have a reason for what happened to him, this is a really scary thing that you can't just look past so quickly. So yeah, best guess is have him come back and put him back in a new weight class and just try it again. And maybe that's the effects of weight cutting over time, which we're finally getting out of the dark ages and realizing in both combat sports that this is a really bad idea to cut so much weight. But I'm very fearful for him. I think he was trying to be as optimistic as he could, but you heard a lot of that fighter come out. And when I say fighter, the same guy who said, I'm fighting no matter what, right? The same guy who they had to con him to get him into a van to get him to the hospital in the first place. That fighter was trying to be as optimistic as possible. I'm not a doctor. I'm not trying to say we've got a major problem here, but I think we've got a major problem here. And I want his health to come first. And I mean, Brian Ortega versus Jose Aldo, this is why you have interim titles, not for all the other interim titles that you're folding out. This is a real situation where an interim title would work and make sense, but it's a clown show now. Everyone's got one.
It's tough, man. When something like that is very public, you know, and he pulls out of a major fight, and you'll see why, and there's all these theories as to what's going on, and you can't find out what the problem is. You're not sure if it's going to happen again. That's a lot to process, even from a fight fan. People who are basically, you know, are immune to guys getting in the cage and blooding each other up. There's something about this, man. It's a guy's life. It's his life. And I think at some point you have to look at that and think, I hope he takes his time. I know when something happens, like you see Chuck Liddell get knocked out too many times, you know, hear his speech kind of altered and things like that. You start to worry. You're like, I don't really want to see him take any more punishment. It's the same thing with like Chris Lieben. You know, he's talking about his heart issues and everything, and you think, I don't really want to see him. But then so he comes back and it's bare knuckle. That's the first thought that goes to your mind, like, why are you doing this stuff? These guys want to keep fighting. Sometimes it's very difficult to separate these two things and say, like, is he okay? I think they have to figure that out more. I really do. And before you even say 145, 155, will he fight again? I don't know, but I think he needs to kind of truly figure this out. You can't really say I'm fine, but we don't know what the thing was. You can't say that.
I think one of the scariest things about this is, like, sure, we've seen fighters have health issues. This is not a weird thing. This is very common, but most of those present themselves after a very long career where you're like, okay, well, if you fight long enough and you get punched in the face long enough, you're gonna, you know, things are gonna come up. But Max Holloway is so young and we still don't know what's going on with him.
He's so young, but he's like a veteran. He was fighting in the UFC at, what, 20 years old or 19?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember those early fights. He was just a kid. And so he's been taking punishment for a long time already.
Max has I've made this point before, Max has a deserved reputation as a tactician. I mean, the fact that he circled one way in the first result of the fight and went the exact opposite way among a number of other tactical adjustments, to me, was just a stroke of brilliance. He is truly a brilliant fighter, but he's also the guy that pointed at Ricardo Lamas at the mat and said, let's just duke it out. He's that guy. And I think a little bit of that has caught up with him. Yeah. My real belief about fighters is that they are terrible self-evaluators until they're willing to feel vulnerable. And that usually happens, although not always, at the end of a career. Mm-hmm. So when they're at the end of the career, like you get Ian McCall being like, I just don't know if I can do this anymore. My hands are messed up, or whatever, you know, whatever the particular nature of the ailment is. But if they're still in that vinegar and piss stage of their career, they are terrible at making judgment in terms of their health. They are absolutely a threat to themselves. What stage or what particular phase of the career Max Holloway is in, I don't know. And I leave that to his capable team, who appears to have his best interest in mind, for sure. But this idea of him fighting this year, anyone else speak out? I'm happy if he takes the whole year.
It had already been a tumultuous, crazy year with the crazy weight cut at 223. That if he fights,
he had two failed cuts in a row, basically.
It's a crime if he doesn't take a full year off to not just figure out that I feel okay for this week, next month, but like, does any of these feelings come back?
Yeah.
And so then, do you think there should be an interim title created, if that's the case?
Maybe
there should be an interim title created every week.
Maybe a super interim. Maybe we say, hey, the other one
when they need it, you know.
This feels a lot like boxing, and it's really sad because, like I said, this is a time when interim would make sense. And
can you recall any boxing scenario where there was something like this, where a guy was like, "Yeah, I had a bad thing happen to me. I don't know what it was, but I might be back soon."
Not off the top of my I don't know.
A young guy too.
Young guy is tough, right in the peak of his prime. I mean, certainly Sugar Ray Leonard went away in the peak of his prime for a few years with an eye injury and came back. But I mean, there's maybe not an exact equivalence. But in boxing, there's already so many floated titles that the whole point of take away the health, just talk about the titles. This is when the interim title would make the most sense of any in history.
That's
maybe
what
outside
they were
of
made for, wasn't it?
Frank Mir post motorcycle accident. That's probably the last time it made this much sense.
Or TJ Dillashaw when he was the initial interim champ when Dominic Cruz was out.
Yes, Dominic Cruz was out for like 2 years, right?
Yep, long time.
They actually waited too long on his.
Yeah. They could have pulled that trigger. I know. Can you believe that? Like, we're gonna hold on to it.
Yes.
It's like, what?
Yeah.
All right. Neither here nor there.
Different times.
Small point before we get to UFC Calgary. Bellator signed 22 European fighters this year. I went through and looked at their resumes. Some are a little bit long in the tooth. Some are very, very new, 2-0, 3-1 types. Some are 15-6. It's a bit of a mix. Predominantly, lightweight and welterweight fighters. Danny, I don't have a whole lot to say about this other than we've been wondering why they keep going to Rome and doing these kickboxing shows, and they've made a big priority around the UK. Clearly, Bellator is pivoting to Europe. They see it for themselves as a growth area. Do you have any response to that? Are you in agreement with me?
More tape delay.
It's in DAZN, brother. Come on.
Oh, that's true.
I'm sorry,
that's
you mean DAZN.
DAZN. No, I like a few of their signings. Like Norman Park, this is a guy that, I never understood why he left the UFC. Like, sure, his record wasn't great, but he was a super exciting fighter. He always brought the fight. He had a few split decisions against, I think Gleison Tibau and Francisco Trinaldo. Very tough guys.
Sure, man.
And he always brought it. Very exciting fighter. He was, really good on the mic as well. I don't know why the UFC let him go. Also, Ultimate Fighter winner. I think he's great in Bellator. I think that's a fantastic signing.
It shows that you're shifting the heartbeat of what Bellator is. They have the tentpole events that we all know about. Love that term, by the way, right?
You would love that term.
I'd pitch one. That's fantastic. But the heartbeat of Bellator used to be Thackerville, Oklahoma, and the site fee at the Native American Casino, or Temecula, California, right? The new heartbeat is Rome, and to get name fighters on the rise. I mean, that's they found MVP, they found James Gallagher, European-based fighters who have the potential to be guys that we care about and already are with MVP. This seems like a smart move. Look, and the idea of then, now, and forever. Bellator does the then. Yeah. The old guy fights really well. The now they're starting to do with this welterweight Grand Prix. Fantastic. The forever, the future, they're building that as well. Hey, Scott Coker, congratulations, brother.
Although Chuck, we have to admit, you're signing this many fighters. I'm not saying some of them appear to be quite good. Yeah. And there's some of them that was like, I think one kid had a 10-1 record. He might be very, very good.
True.
But my point is this.
Who's the Bama guy, the two division champ from Bama?
Terry Brazier.
Yeah, Brazier.
Point being is this. They also have a lot of contractual commitments to produce content. You would talk about the new Top Rank deal with ESPN today, that they shredded the old one. They have a new 7-year deal, more than 50 shows a year. This is not the same deal, but my point being is these combat sports promoters are being asked to produce a lot of content for a lot of platforms. I also feel like, yes, it's a pivot to Europe. It's also a pivot towards more content that we may not necessarily be asking for.
True. But I do think the European market it's important for them. And, we always hear people asking us, I know Ariel used to talk about this a lot, when are they coming back to London? When are they coming to Manchester? When are they coming, I feel like it's smart for Bellator to say, I think there's a need for ourselves out there, and so let's go do this. And it didn't surprise me at all. You were actually way ahead of this trend. I didn't really notice the infusion of cards.
I usually am, Chuck Mindenhall.
Yeah, you were way ahead of it. I remember you were mentioning this, but this kind of just confirmed, obviously, that that's what their plan is.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Now, let's go look backwards a little bit. UFC Calgary took place last weekend. A lot of different moving parts that I want to get to inside of that larger topic. The first one, of course, is about the winner in the main event, Dustin Poirier. He mentioned it on the microphone. It didn't even occur to me. I can look at a guy's resume, but I don't sometimes connect all the dots in the ways that they did. 3 wins in a row, 3 stoppages over 3 former champions. Pettis, of course, former WC, UFC champion. Justin Gaethje, World Series of Fighting. And then Eddie Alvarez, former a gazillion titles he's
Dog.
UFC.
Yeah, but the UFC is the big one, right? So here he is, and he's like, what more do I have to do to get a title shot? I want to talk about that aspect in just a minute, but Brian, correct me if I'm wrong. I made this point in MMA Hour. If you disagree, by all means, let me know. He doesn't have a title. He's got some work left to do. But I believe that was, number one, the best win of Dustin Poirier's career, and he is officially, in my judgment, 16 wins, 11 by way of stoppage. He is an elite. He has an elite resume at lightweight.
Absolutely, and it comes down to the poise, right? I mean, we had fears when he fought Gaethje. Would it be the Dustin of old who can get lured into a war and get off of his game plan? He's really matured. Both Alvarez fights, certainly that win over Gaethje, and what he's showing you is it's the poise, the patience, relying on his strengths, his length in this case, the speed, the boxing. But I think if you really listen to his interviews and go deeper, it's even more than just the, well, I'm a dad now, I'm married, I understand the business a little bit better. It's also deeper if you hear his words. He's saying it doesn't matter to him as much. He doesn't care. He's not biting down as hard and living and dying with every interview and everything that happens. And I think loose Dustin Poirier, rather than tight, is a lot better. He's ready.
He's had to grow in reverse, man. Remember there was a movie or a documentary about him a few years ago when he was just a young cat. And, you know, I felt like there was a lot of pressure on this guy all of a sudden to perform then. He kind of went through some rough patches. He was very young still, and I feel like he's had to figure it out from a position of expectation, kind of go through some to the point where now I feel like he's got some, you know, some swagger when he's talking on the microphone, his style. But just in general, I think he's figured out a lot of things about the fight game, not just improving inside, but outside too. Like he's certainly changed, man. And I feel good for him because a lot of these guys, you see them come up, and once they lose once or twice, they just kind of fade away. He's a resilient guy, and he's gotten better and better. Like you just mentioned, man, the guys he's going through, it puts him right there. You look at like a possible like Ferguson fight now, and suddenly that becomes like a very, very big deal. That wouldn't have been the case, you know, maybe 6 months ago. These last couple fights have really boosted his stock that way.
I think composure is what's key here. He's become a lot more aware of because he's always been super skilled. Like if you look at his jiu-jitsu and his fights and his grappling, amazing. His striking's great. But he's a fighter and he likes to brawl. So that has always been his issue. That has caught him, you know, put him in trouble in a few situations. But now that he's a lot more, you know, more poised, more composed, he's, you know, really coming to his own. And 100%, he's legit.
And there's something to that not caring thing. When you stopped caring about shaving, your career took off huge.
You know what? It's funny that so much of Conor McGregor just keeps reflecting glory on him, because, you know, you look at the guys he beat, Poirier in retrospect, you know what I mean, and Aldo, of course, but like Holloway. You look at those guys and what they've been able to do since they lost essentially to him. It's kind of amazing, man, because it just makes McGregor look that much better. It's a weirdly reluctant way to do that kind of MMA math, but it is very funny because he just keeps coming up looking like gold all the time.
He had a great streak of timing too. They gave him,
of course,
Max Holloway's always been tough, but he got Max right before Max became really who he is. But that was before Conor, who he really was.
He hasn't lost since then.
It's pretty incredible. The only thing I'll say about Dustin Poirier, beyond what we've already discussed here, is, folks, I mean, remember what he used to have a rep as. You alluded to it, kind of this brawler a little bit. Folks forget this. He used to be noted as a guy who didn't have a great gas tank. Now look at him. Now this fight didn't go 2 rounds, but the one against Gaethje went through.
They're all high paced though.
Yeah, and he's out there looking good. I remember Mike Brown telling me, he's like, I know no one believes me, but I'm telling you, he's got good cardio. He just has to know how to use it. Talk about you. I think it is maturity, man. Proficiency, efficiency in his professional life, in his personal life, finding it. A lot of these guys who come from these roughneck backgrounds, which he does and did, they want to just bend the world through force of rage. And when they figure out you can't quite do that, but you can get pretty close if you're a little more strategic with it, and then they dial it back just a notch, that's when they really have their success. Conor McGregor is another one of those kinds of guys, to a degree. So that's been really, really fascinating to watch his rise. The question to the table is, he has told me on Tuesday, I'll only fight Ferguson, whoever, if it's a metric ton of money. Otherwise, the phone better not ring up for anything other than a title shot. What is Poirier's next fight? Call it. Who wants it?
The division's too much of a mess to call it. Yeah, go for it.
I think it's Ferguson. Now, he's saying that now. But I know, once everybody starts negotiating, Danny gets involved in all that. I think it'd be Ferguson because I think the timing will work out, especially if, Nurmagomedov and McGregor are going to be fighting anywhere toward the end of the year. I think their timing would mesh. And they're literally right there. I think you have an established #1 contender for the winner of that fight.
Could be something to be said, though, for just staying healthy and keeping your phone on the hook and ready. Because, I mean, Kevin Lee lucked into a title shot. L.I. Akinta, right? Put his real estate.
Yeah, none of this ever works out the way we're talking about, by the way.
So, I mean,
we're going to be, for sure wrong.
Yes.
You could lose it all in one night against Ferguson. By the way, does he still have the interim title? My interims are all over.
No, they dissolved it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Disappeared.
It just went away.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
I think it's going to be Tony Ferguson. I'm afraid it is. I hope it's for an actual belt. His next fight.
Couldn't it be weird that Tony Ferguson was the interim champ, had it dissolved, comes back and fights Poirier for another interim championship, and you would be like,
two-time interim champion.
And you would be like, well, I don't know if he needs a belt, but those are the two guys right below the two guys, right? I mean, it kind of makes sense in that way.
So stupid.
I know it's the dumbest stuff ever. Now that leaves us with Eddie Alvarez, who had an incredibly poignant Instagram post yesterday where it almost looked like he was crying blood, except he wasn't. It was just a cut here on the cheek, and the blood was coming down. It was wow.
You mess with those filters. Same thing we do when we take pictures in our backyard.
But there wasn't a lot you could do to make that pretty. He was banged up. He was really banged up, and I thought it was a mature response from him. I thought it was if you are a young fighter and you want to see how elite fighters lose and take losses, that was a great way to see it. But that's not really what I'm focused on. I guess my question is, and Danny, I'll go to you. He fought out his contract. I think he made the right strategic call. I made this point before. He made more in his last Bellator fight, than he did in the one prior to the Poirier fight. I can understand why he fought it out, but it didn't necessarily work out for him. What happens next to Eddie Alvarez?
I wouldn't necessarily say, sure, he lost. That definitely hurt him.
He's 33. That was his last big contract for money. 34? Yeah.
But, I mean, he's still a very hot commodity. I mean, a fight with Nate Diaz, there's history there, and that would be super exciting.
You think Nate Diaz wants him off that loss?
Or he can, maybe, I don't know.
I doubt that.
And then he can maybe go to Bellator and fight Michael Chandler. He's got plenty of options. So I think Eddie Alvarez is a hot commodity. I don't think he's not like Dustin Poirier or Max Holloway, where he's one of these up-and-coming guys that he's coming up at the top. He's already at the top. I wouldn't say he's on a downhill yet. But he's a guy who's already in his prime. He still has a few fights left on his prime, and then we'll probably see in a few years a decline. But that's still very valuable. And we've seen Bellator pick up guys way down the hill. So Eddie Alvarez would be a pretty hot buy. And then he could stay in the UFC and still be competitive. This is a guy that's headline pay-per-views.
No. What will happen next?
What will happen? I think he goes to Bellator.
Wow.
I think he goes to Bellator.
He should go to Bellator.
Because if you see the way he was making money in the UFC, it was really all centered around that belt. And for him to get back on a title shot, that's going to be a long road, especially how murky the lightweight division's looking. And look, he's 33, you mentioned, 34? 34. And he wants to make money. What was the biggest talk going into this fight with Dustin Poirier? I want to make money. I want to make money. It wasn't really I want to get back to the title. The money, his future is
tired of all these fighters talking about money all the time.
So I can definitely see him going to Bellator, and I can see Bellator opening up the checkbook.
Yeah, he's a B-side for the rest of his career. This is the second half.
That's true.
In UFC, I mean. And it's a seller's market. It's the best time to be a fighter, free agent at the
Diaz
moment.
brothers have been B-sides. You say B-side, you can still be a very valuable B-side.
You could, but he's going to end up being an opponent. Where if he goes to, everybody goes to Bellator when they have to, right? The names, outside of Rory, maybe Benson was on the line, but outside of Rory and Gegard, you go to Bellator because you have to. He might be the guy who goes a little bit early. And tell me this, if he goes to Bellator right now and they have all that great footage of the Chandler fight, you can do a fourth Chandler fight, you can do a Brent Primus fight, all that, he could become the face of the company again. Yeah. He could become MMA's Arturo Gatti, step down his competition just a bit and just go, this is King of the Underground. He's back home where he belongs. And guess what? He's headlining every night, whether that's Rome or Thackerville, because I'll be there. I'll be at both.
It certainly has some poetic value because he fought on Bellator 1, It's like he's a guy who goes back to the original roots of Bellator. So I feel like if he does go back to Bellator, there is some kind of like spiritual home for him there. And there's actually some nice competition for him over there now. At least it's better than it was when he left. I wouldn't be surprised if he does that, but I happen to think, though, that he fights the way the UFC wants its fighters to fight. Like, he puts on a show every single time. They used to give those speeches beforehand, leave it all in there. Like, they'd give these, you guys want to win the bonus? Dangling the carrot. He fights like that. Naturally, that's just who he is. So if the UFC lets him go, I'd have to start to wonder to what point they're changing their strategy. You know what I mean? Because to me, he's the I mean, he's the prototypical UFC fighter. He's the guy that they want in there.
Typically, though, for folks who have gone to Bellator, the UFC has not even attempted to match. I wonder how that might change if Alvarez decides, wow, that's a lucrative Bellator offer I want to go after. Does the UFC decide to match then? Because people think that they tried to match in the Bader or like the Davis cases.
No, he has less value for them. They wouldn't match it. He has a lot more value for Bellator.
Yeah, potentially. Now, that takes us to Jose Aldo. Wow. I have to tell you, Chuck, when I watched his reaction, I've been watching it. I've watched it over and over again, It looked to me, what did it look like to you? Because it looked to me like a guy who realized he had just rescued himself.
Yeah.
Like that was like what somebody would do if you had rescued someone's child, and that would be their tears pulling them out of some kind of well they had fallen into.
Baby Jessica, 1987.
He was like Baby Jessica, 1987.
He's had some of the best in-fight like celebrations and reactions of anybody in the sport. That's what I realized too. Like jumping in the crowd at UFC 142, you know, after the Mendes. To me, man, you see those moments, and you mentioned humanizing, like when we're talking about DJ earlier. To me, it just humanizes guys like that, because you remember that, you know, we put them in these top-class athletes who, you know, we see in the cage and they're doing these things. I think at some point you just kind of lose track that these are human beings, but you see an emotional release like that and what it meant to him. A guy that, you know, he supposedly should have killed if he's fighting him like maybe 3 years ago, you know, where he's at in his career, how much it meant to him. I mean, all that stuff comes flooding in, and it always, when you see something like that, it makes me realize how great the sport can be. You know what I mean? Like, I get a very good feeling about who the guys are competing in it, and it gives you a whole new appreciation.
Sometimes good guys win.
That's right.
Well, like, save for Dominic Cruz's comeback, I don't know that a win as a fan in me, it felt that good watching it. I'm not even really an Aldo guy and the deep fan in me behind the journalism front, right? That just felt good, and why it felt good was the humanized, but his reaction showed you that the same fears we had in the stories we wrote and the words we shared ahead of the fight, they were real for him. He really, I believe, had those same fears that he's not the same guy.
Which is so funny that you bring that up, because after all the fights he was winning on his winning streak, he'd be like, did you think the fight was close? He'd be like, no, not really. To the point, all the words that we thought were true as we were describing the things around us, he had no relationship to them whatsoever. And then all of a sudden, we're all speaking the same language, even though, you know, it's Portuguese and one's English. It's kind of funny that way.
It made me realize that whole emotion made me realize how elite and how professional Jose Aldo is, because I mean, he's gone through a rough patch. I mean, he was unbeaten for almost a decade, was it? And, you know, he had a really rough patch, and the whole time he said the great things. You know, Max Holloway is a great champion. He you know, if anybody deserves it, he deserves it. The whole time he was a whole professional in front of the media. And the release that he had of emotions when he won that fight, it was just crazy. It was just, you really see how much pressure he had going into it, and yet the way he behaved in the lead up. Jose Aldo is truly one of the greats.
I think, you know, it was almost as if he loses this fight, and it came close, because there was that moment where you're like, oh, here he goes.
Okay, he got lit up.
You're thinking, like, here it goes. The reason that meant so much is because he loses this fight, the great Jose Aldo is gone. We don't get him back. He's just, that gets put aside. The thing that we uphold, you know, his glow or whatever you want to call it, is just gone. You know, he may fight on for after that, but he wouldn't be the same. So this kind of preserved something. It kept it going, and it actually, him to dig deep and come back in that fight, I mean, it actually shows you something more about him too.
That loss would have been the end of an era. This one, he talked to Gary McCruz, and he said, you know, I'm coming back, and I'm on a tour to get the title back and leave on top. I have a finish line, and I'm going to finish it, but I'm going to leave on top on my own terms. That loss would have been the end of an era. We still have a prime. We still have a very skilled Jose Aldo.
Prime, no.
Maybe not prime, but very close.
Yeah.
He gets to lease that name of still elite Jose Aldo for one more fight, when the devil's advocate question is, was it fool's gold? Because that was a brawler in Jeremy Stephens who masqueraded as a title contender for a couple fights and looked great in doing it. But when the chips hit the fan there, Aldo relied on his technique.
The chips hit the fan?
Yeah.
Can you mix 7 or 8 more metaphors together?
I love it. It's a big soup. But the point is, in the end, you know, that could end up being a little bit of fool's gold. But, man, it just tasted good right on the lips, right? Just for a second, just to see how it was.
It was one more day in the sun. Okay, very quickly, because there's 2 more things we have to get to. So I'm going to go down the line. Give me one reason why the ratings for UFC Calgary were so low. We'll go this way.
I mean, I've been saying it. This is El Pastorcito Mentiroso. This is, you know, the boy cries wolf, or whatever the analogy is here in the U.S. You keep going, this is a great card, tune in. This is a great card, tune in. Then you go watch UFC Hamburg. This is a great card, this is fantastic, tune in, and it turns out to be a dud. Now you really have a fantastic card, and you're saying the exact same thing. Hey, let's go back. We got great fighters here. We got great action. You got to go home. You're drunk. You know?
Yeah.
This is literally what it is. You cannot expect to put really bad MMA and not expect to have any repercussions. There's fans. The fans are going to see that and are going to get turned off. So when you actually got the good stuff, you're not going to believe it.
Right. Yeah, this calendar year, you're seeing finally the hardcore fans have turned. Look, the casuals are always going to come and go with the stars. You can't do 1.5 million pay-per-view buys unless you have a big star to lure the casuals. But the hardcores believed in the UFC brand because that's how they built it. They built Dana as the face, which we always say in a negative way. The fighters didn't get paid enough. Dana was the face, but that established that the UFC brand always comes through. But it doesn't come through anymore for the hardcores, and that's why even a great card like UFC Calgary, great not for the depth, great for the 3 fights on top, even that wasn't enough. I think even the hardcores are scaling back to casual right now.
I just think it's the saturation too, man. I mean, the bottom line is when you have that many cards, something like this is bound to happen. I'm surprised, actually, it didn't happen sooner, that you'd see some kind of plateau or declining in the numbers like this. I thought this card was great, but these people, the people we're talking about, Aldo, Jędrzejczyk, including that main event, which was awesome. None of those names are going to ring the way they used to. That's just the way it is now, right? Or as of right now, for whatever reason, it's just too many cards, no off season, not enough promotion for the right way where you're actually pointing out the big events and things like that. So it just all at some point it was bound to happen like this.
And I also just don't think it was. I'm one of these guys who thinks that the typical criticism that the card is not promoted enough is usually false. When you're on the ground, you can begin to see how much money goes into promotion. But this was one where it was like Dana White had an opportunity to piggyback off the Conor McGregor news and do the car wash and did not do any of it. I was very surprised by that. Just always, if you really want to see how well a card is going to do, ask yourself this: how many times did you hear a UFC topic or a UFC fighter on a mainstream sports show? Get Up on ESPN or Le Batard or pick anything, your local radio station. Are they talking about UFC on the Thursday or Friday before fight? If not, it has not reached the casual audience at all. True. So there you go. All right, it is time now for our recurring news segment called Under the Radar. What's a story that's floating out there? It doesn't have to be big, although it could be, that folks are just not paying quite enough attention to. We'll start on that end and work over. Chuck, what's under the radar? It's under the radar only in the sense because I thought it was going to be much bigger news when it finally came around. But we're getting closer to that Russia event in the UFC. And I just thought when they were going to finally hit that market that it was going to be this big bells and whistles. You know what I mean? We're kind of piggybacking off what we were just talking about. It's crazy to me that we're going to tiptoe into an event. And I kind of was looking at that card a little bit. It leaves a little bit for the imagination. I wish they had kind of spruced it up a little more, but I'm still very interested to see kind of what happens with that market, and I think it should be a bigger deal. The UFC should be treating it as a bigger deal.
For me, maybe this doesn't fit the category perfectly, but when Conor McGregor tells TMZ it's probably going to be Vegas, not New York for my comeback, my follow-up question is then the heck's going to be that New York main event? You said the New Year's Eve card hasn't felt like a New Year's Eve card in a while. Well, the New York cards have been an absolute home run. Yep. Seriously.
At MSG.
Yes.
At MSG. Sorry, Buffalo. Shut up. Or Albany or whatever. Yeah.
Or how about even Brooklyn?
But hey, that's a great call. But seriously, let's play fantasy matchmaker. What in the heck is going to be that main event? It's not GSP against Anderson Silva. Seriously, what is it going to be?
Oh. What's under the radar?
I think this is not a story yet, but a potential story. Have you guys seen Vitor Belfort's Instagram by any chance?
No.
The traps are back.
Oh, really?
Traps are back, and he's looking good. And he hasn't retired officially, and he wants to come back to fight. So I'm all in for TRT Vitor and Ryzen or
Mohawk. Give me that Mohawk back.
So that's a potential story that could play out this year.
That's interesting. I have not seen that.
Check it out.
I'm gonna have to look at that.
I mean, he's got almost no neck.
I would say for under the radar, I wasn't that under the radar, but I don't know that I got enough attention. You can know more about this. The Association of Boxing Commission passing a rule for second-day weigh-ins for all championship fights. Is that the idea? And there's a degree of specificity about how much you can weigh before and after. I encourage you to go look it up. There is an article about it on ESPN, on MMA Fighting.
10%.
10% is the difference. But people have asked, would that make sense for MMA? In this current state, no. Maybe going forward, possible. Remember, there are more weight classes in boxing, and the Association of Boxing Commission has more say over boxing than it does for MMA, but something to keep in mind. Okay, so that's our under the radar, but we still have more show left. We have taken your questions using the hashtag #TheMMABeat on Twitter, and now we have to get to them with our segment called After the Beat. Don't go anywhere. Keep it right here. We're going to answer your questions right now. All right, we're back. Time for After the Beat. Luke Thomas, Danny Segura, Brian Campbell, and Chuck Mindenhall here for you. I used to call this the beat off, but then people got mad at me, so I had to stop doing it.
I haven't heard you use that in a while.
Yeah, people got bitter at me about it.
No
so
fab zone.
I know. So I will not call it that, but we are here for After the Beat. We've taken your questions using the hashtag the MMA Beat. We have pulled some select tweets out. Now, have you seen this before?
No.
You've never seen this?
I usually peter out if you want to keep those going.
Yeah,
about,
fair enough.
about 75 minutes, yeah.
So the deal is this. These questions will be about MMA, but they'll also be about crazy things too.
So soccer usually.
So be on, dude. There's now because of what you said, people are asking us soccer questions, anything. And then they're tagging you in them.
I noticed that.
That's
great.
the expert right here.
All right, let's get to our first question, shall we? And I can't read because I'm going blind. Why isn't pirating discussed more as an attributing factor, they're missing the word there, to the low pay-per-view numbers? I'm the only schmuck out of everyone I know that watches MMA that actually pays for the events. I'd like to go first on this if I can, gentlemen, because this is the perennial excuse of, not that I haven't heard the UFC trot this out in a while, or any promoter in a while, but whenever you hear a promoter complaining about it, it's essentially an admission that they didn't do their job, which is to say the following. Yes, pirating can be a serious problem. I'm sure it does absolutely undercut promoters whenever they try to do something of significance. We can all agree that that's really true. You can remember how much pirating there was for Mayweather-McGregor. At the same time, Mayweather-McGregor ended up being arguably the greatest selling pay-per-view worldwide of all time. So which is it, right? You were massively impeded by pirating, or you're the most successful venture in that space. The reality is this: while it's a constant problem, I have been in combat sports, Brian, long enough, and I'm sure you have as well. I'm sure you've heard Bob Arum complain about it at times. The reality is, yes, it matters, but it only happens. It happens all the time with promoters after something went wrong. It's true that they can still succeed after. They often do succeed after. They just trot it out to say, let me cover my ass a little bit. True or false?
I think that's true, and I think the more you promote it, by the way, if you're a promoter and you blame it, you encourage it in the end, right? You encourage people to feel, oh, wait, other people aren't paying for it? How do I figure that out? I think you just don't touch it. You don't talk about it. Is it responsible for a portion? Absolutely. This is where we are in 2018. There's no question about it, but no, don't cry. Don't lean on it.
All I know is when I've known some people who've pirated, you know, they would always tell you. I know some people who've done that, obviously, but like
talking about the
for
staff
the most, yes, our staff, no. But for the most part, it's funny. I feel like I don't really think about it too much because most people I know honestly purchase the pay-per-view, or the bars do, or the things around you. So it's almost like I push that out of my mind. I don't really believe there probably is an uptick in how much piracy is going on that might affect it a bit. I just think honestly the bigger thing is just the waning interest. I just think it's more about that on whole than it is more people
I know
pirating.
tons of people that do pirating.
Sure.
Your demo.
Yes, I was going to say.
Because, you know, most of my friends don't have cable, so they just rely on the internet and, you know, a few links here and there. But, yeah, I mean, you cannot possibly blame piracy for bad pay-per-views because just a few months ago, we've had a huge pay-per-view. So, I mean, it ultimately hurts, obviously, to some degree, but you cannot blame it entirely.
Yeah. Pirating's not free. Your computer gets basically an equivalent of an STD most of the time. So
I mean, if you have a Mac, you should be all right.
Yeah, if you have a nice computer, you'd be fine. If you have that piece of junk you're pulling around. This is the other part too. It's like, what was the last time you had a pay-per-view that would have done 500,000, but for piracy, it was knocked down to 3? Yeah. Like anytime a pay-per-view is done around and also, 3 or 4, there are reasons you can cobble together to explain. Yeah, it's about where it should end up.
And I'll say this: I know tons of people that go, I'll stream that one. Because what happens when you stream? I'm sure maybe you guys have done some. The quality's terrible. It's choppy. It dies on you. You have to constantly find like.
I hear that's often in another language. I don't know if that's true or not.
It's often in another language. You're in a tiny little computer, right? If you hook it up to your TV, the resolution's not the same. It's shit. Let's be honest. Yeah. So when you got something good, you want to pay for it. Why? Because you want to get the HD. Yeah. You don't want it to fail in the middle of a sequence. If it's good, people are down to pay. If it's shitty, people are down to watch a shitty stream.
You can't blame piracy. You got to blame really crappy main cards. 227, when you fail, by the way, 227, great NBC sitcom in the 80s, by the way. When you fail, it's because of the fights on your pay-per-view main card. Who's in that women's strawweight bout on Saturday night? Exactly.
Pollyanna Viana and
Wow, he ruined the joke. He just blew it up.
I forgot who the other one was. Sorry. What were you gonna say, Chuck?
227 was a good show. Wasn't that a spinoff of the Jeffersons?
Yeah, it was
Okay.
with Jack
I just
A.
wanted to, I just want to finish that thought.
Beans don't wait. How's it go? Beans don't burn in the kitchen. No, I can't remember what it is.
East Side.
Who cares? All right, let's go to the next one. All right, let's see. Oh, here we go. The ABC passed on Tuesday a new regulation for second-day weigh-ins. What are you guys doing that for?
I was trying to tell you, you could read it easy over there.
Oh, all right. On championship, because that's tapping me like a gunman walked in the room. Championship participants cannot gain more than 10% of the contracted weight the day of the fight. Thoughts on MMA adopting this rule? Brian, let's go with you since you come from boxing. What do you make of this?
It's a step in the right direction, but it's still obscenely archaic, and I think there will become a time.
Why is it archaic?
That we're still doing this, that we're still allowing people to dramatically cut so bad. I think, like, we look back at people fighting without gloves and Joe San getting punched in the crotch by Keith Hackney 57 times and laugh about how absurd it used to be. We will do that about these days of hard weight cuts. You want to fix weight cutting in every possible weight cutting sport, you have to weigh in Thursday morning, Thursday night, Friday morning, Friday night, Saturday morning, and right before you walk out to the fight. Is it really that hard? Fight at your natural weight.
Well, not everyone's natural weight is the same. Some might be a few pounds over, so there has to be some weight cutting. I don't know if this is the right answer to it.
I think you just contract the weight in the contract. Oh, how much do you weigh? You know, ask Conor, what do you want to fight at? How about 160? What do you want to fight at? How about 165? Okay, 165.
And what weight class would that be? What belt would that be?
The one that's going to get a shitload of money. I know that one.
There has to be weight classes. I think
If there's a 175 and a 165, you're right in the money.
Yeah.
Yeah, but shouldn't you have to prove you can make that weight more than just one time as you look like Skeletor? Like, this is not a new theory, guys. Why are we still doing this? Are they waiting for a champion to die? Like, is that what it's?
That's what Kevin Lee said, but I disagree. I think there is a benefit to weight cutting, not a substantial one, and there's a real, and it goes right to the edge of the cliff, and once you go off the cliff, then there's no going back. But I do think getting a little size advantage, yeah, it's significant actually. People are like, why do people keep weight cutting? It's bad for you because size confers advantage. Yeah. I mean, why is this hard to understand?
So that's kind of cheating, right? Do I have to be the soapbox guy who says that Brock just failed a steroid test and Darren Till was 4 pounds overweight? I'll be that guy if I have to.
You can carry that cross. What do you think, Chuck?
We've been through this so many times, man. I know. Honestly, like, I do sometimes think we're waiting for somebody to die. I certainly don't know if this, like you mentioned, I don't know if this would be anything better. That's an interesting theory, what you just said. If you really want to get people a consistent idea, you would do something like that. If you want them to be really the same weight the whole way, that's what you do.
How bad is weight cutting in boxing in your judgment?
Just as bad as MMA, absolutely.
People say that. Is that true? Because the wrestling weight cutting culture is terrible.
You don't see as many near situations of, I guess, death. You see some, but you see more advantages. I mean, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. built his entire short career at the top on the fact that he could fight at middleweight in a cruiserweight body. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous coming in with that type of advantage.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, let's go next. Let's see here. Okay, so the question is favorite metal band. Now, I know Danny's a big Dying Fetus fan, as am I. But I'll flip the question around a little bit. How about this? We'll go with you, Danny, first. How about favorite music act? Period.
Wow.
Your number one, lo mejor.
Jeez.
Favorite music act, like performance? Like,
you mean like an event?
What exactly do you refer when you say that?
When you say this person, this band, this group, this whatever, this is my favorite artist in music. This is my number one. What would you say? Do you have one?
Well, I still fail to get the question. What do you mean? Who's my favorite band, or what do you mean?
Okay, a music artist.
Right.
Could be either a band, can be a person, can be an orchestra, but which one?
Trans-Siberian on fire.
Certainly everyone's top 5 list. What would be your number one favorite musical act? It's tough, right?
Yeah.
It's tougher when you actually
I feel
zoom
like
out on the genres.
you get a little bit of advantage because you get to think of these questions beforehand.
Yeah, of course I pick them.
Yeah. What is your answer?
Oh, let's go down the line then. Do you have one?
I don't, man, but because I've been
You sound fun.
I
You seem
have
like a
so
fun
many
guy,
genres. I like multiple genres of music. There's not like one band that I'm like, I love this at all times.
What are a couple that just always end up in rotation?
Man, I like listening to, you know, the first wave station. Like if I'm on the serious channels and stuff like that, I like a lot of that early, you know, alternative stuff. But I loved a lot of metal, early metal. I don't really listen to it as much as you do. You know a lot of the more current stuff. I love punk music a lot.
All right.
I loved old outlaw country. Man, I could go on and on. So that's what I'm saying. I love Johnny Cash.
Your favorite
just as
album
much.
of any kind?
Not really, man. I really don't.
Wow.
This is the lamest music conversation of all time.
These always suck. It's like because you can't pick. It's tough.
I think people can pick. I just think you
can
don't.
you pick? Can you?
I got a couple out there I can. Name.
right.
Hold on, let's go to Brian.
I'm a big indie rock fan today, so My Morning Jacket, Wilco, Head in the Heart are my core right now. But I mean, I'm a giant classic rock folk guy. Bob Dylan, The Byrds, Jimi Hendrix. Come on, you know. I mean, it's really not that hard. Pearl Jam, come on, put on '90s one-hit wonders. I'm right in my feel hole. You know what I mean? If you know what I mean, it's gross, but you know what I mean.
I
know you're white. I know that.
I listen to like way too many different types of music to really pick one.
Throw out a couple.
But I'll just say, like, I can never go wrong with listening to some reggaeton. Never.
You know what? I can't hate on that.
Reggaeton's awesome.
Can you
It's always good
translate
vibes.
that? What was that?
Reggaeton's like what, like Hispanic rap combined with reggae,
Almost like a dance music,
kind of.
something like that.
Yeah.
Like a prime.
It's always a
311?
good time.
It's not the same as Spanish or Latin rap, which is different. It's more like, you know, Daddy Yankee or Nicky Jam, a little bit.
Maluma.
J Balvin.
Bailamo, let
Bad
the
Bunny.
rhythm take me over.
Bailamos.
I've done some of that.
Well, that's not reggaeton.
shake it
That's
off.
not reggaeton.
All right.
Daddy Yankee or Yankee is the big one.
That's
what
the
you
OG.
know.
Wow.
That's
off the track.
For me, I'll say top music acts, like things that just keep ending up in my playlist like all the time. It's hard to say a little bit, but I would say, and you're gonna laugh,
Milli Vanilli.
Milli Vanilli. How did you know? No, it's not that. It's going to be Pantera is probably one of the most.
I was going to say Pantera.
Pantera is just, I mean, it's borderline gospel for me.
Kind of make-out music, too, in a way.
You know, it's definitely romantic. When I think of By Demons Be Driven, I think, I want to kiss a girl.
They're the roofies, right?
Oh man!
Wow.
Taking it there.
Hey, no one gets to this point in the show. We know that, though.
Yes,
right?
everyone
I
has.
don't even know if that camera's
everyone
on
has
right
officially tuned out. Hold on, I'm going to pull up. Oh fucking hell! Hold on, let me pull this up. Oh yeah, the other one I was going to say. I'll leave that aside. But the other act that I swear to God, people are going to say it's not true, but has had the biggest effect on my tastes is a close second would be Depeche Mode, but then would be Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke, to me, might be the most talented musician I've ever heard in my life, period. Independent of style, independent of anything. I just can't believe how good he is.
Yeah.
So, and, you know, like Brian, a womanizer. All right, let's go to the next one.
How dare you?
All right, do you think pay-per-view and overall viewership, Chuck, will be better when UFC transitions over to ESPN?
I hope so. I really do, man. I want the sport to kind of start thriving again. You know, it's a lot more fun to cover when you got multiple stars and
When
everything.
sport's hot, it's so fun.
When it is hot and you got multiple, every event looks like an event because there's a big star in each one. I love it when it's like that. So I hope we return to that. We always talk about the kind of peaks and valleys of this sport. I hope we're heading towards another peak. I'm a little skeptical though, man. I think that there's just been, you know, we've seen the sport so much. There used to be a novelty just to checking it out, to understanding it, to understanding jiu-jitsu better, to understanding striking better, to understanding the personalities better. I feel like most people who've paid attention know those things now. I just think there's a little bit of a waning of spirit. They need to kind of tap into the next generation of fans, I think, to get it back to that level.
If they can't, it's an absolute failure with this ESPN deal. How could it not? How could you not increase your pay-per-views with that type of promotion? We talk about not being promoted.
That's what they said before the Fox deal. That's what they said before the Fox deal.
I just don't know. Well, look, think about it. There's still that advantage in the battle of ESPN versus Fox or FS1 that every gym, every bar, every restaurant's default is still ESPN and SportsCenter. It's just automatically going to spread a little bit more like wildfire. Taking it off of TV and putting it on a pay app, ESPN Plus, is a minor problem in that. But overall, come on, it can't fail.
I think it has to improve. I mean, watching UFC on Fox 30, like the ratings, that has to be alarming for the UFC. Pay-per-view numbers for UFC 226, that has to be alarming. And ESPN is a fresh start for them. They have to be looking at all these things and go, we have to change something. So I think something will improve.
I don't think it will improve at all until, hold on.
You're so positive.
Hold on. I will make a clarification. I'll make a clarification. Remember what this deal calls for. They're going to air according to the deal, and remember, if it's going to air partly on ESPN, they're going to sell ads against it. So ESPN is waiting on this content 12 pay-per-views a year. Sorry. They are setting themselves up for dramatic failure if they continue down that path. There is no way, remember, it's a 5-year deal. I call bullshit now. There is no way in 5 years they're doing 12 pay-per-views a year. It is not possible. They are going to absolutely run themselves into the ground. ESPN can do, I think, a lot of things for them. It cannot save them on pay-per-view. It cannot. No outlet can. They have to save themselves in that space. Yeah. So,
if I guaranteed you that Conor McGregor fought 5 times in the next 2.5 years and won 4 of them, would you, and you knew that coming in, would you say the pay-per-view business would have been fixed?
No. It would be better. But the pay-per-view is fine for marquee attractions and nobody else. So how would
that rising tides? Right?
How would that transfer over? It wouldn't. Okay, let's go. What Beat panelist would win Chopped? By the way, this is from Dr. Jed Meshew II, the man who has only the most nuanced takes on Twitter. You ever seen his Twitter, Brian?
No, I've never seen Chopped either. So I'll just kind of.
Okay, so here's the setup.
Show, right?
Here's the setup to Chopped. Here's what they do. They get 3 chefs. Sometimes they get amateurs, but they get 3 chefs. They sit at, or maybe 4 to start, excuse me. They set 4 chefs. And they give you, there's 3 stages, but the basic idea is that they give you a basket of ingredients. And they appear to be picked at random. Here is beets and tofu, honey, and rice. Make something. Now, you've got a pantry full of other proteins you can add. You've got veggies you can add. You got all kinds of stuff you can add. And you've got a stove, and you got all the utensils you need to cook. You got like 30 minutes to make a dish, and then the best dish wins. And they're looking for creativity. All the ingredients have to be in there. But I guess the basic idea is that who would win at Chopped? I don't know. Probably not me. But
I've been cooking up hot takes all day. Count these rocks, biatch. You know what I'm saying?
Who here is a good cook? What's your best dish that you make?
Ooh. I'm not a very good cook, man. But
you don't listen to music.
I do listen to music. I listen to so much music, though, that it's hard to pare down. I eat so much food. No, but I make tacos pretty well.
Okay, what goes into taco? Soft or hard shell?
Hard shell.
Okay.
And just some lettuce and cheese and some meat. But that kind of
sounds very adventurous. What do we do?
But are we trying to answer this question, or are we just like talking about our
would win Chopped? I don't know. Like, how good of a cook is anybody here?
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty decent.
I was gonna say I actually was going to.
I wouldn't be able to tell you like a specific dish that I make, but like I don't know, just the basics. I can cook chicken, make pasta.
You can make pasta.
Holy, not make pasta, man.
But, you know.
Holy chef, Iron Chef Morimoto. What else can you do?
And I actually think I might have a good chance at being the best at
Chopped.
And you might know why. In Colombia, there's this really, especially where I'm from in Bogota, this really famous thing called calentado.
Yes.
Which is basically just means like reheat. Which what it is you get all your basically like old food that's still good to eat, and then you just mix it and you make something random out of it. And in calentado is never the same. It's never the same. So you add rice, beans, plantains, chicken,
and
steak,
they top it off with a beautiful egg
and an egg. Yeah.
That's exactly how UFC made Saturday's card. This is so like
so the yolk runs into it.
I'm an expert at just picking random shit and making something out of it.
You know what? Danny wins. Danny would win Chopped.
I was gonna actually say Danny would win.
Yeah.
So I got it right.
It's got the culture.
Can you make anything of note besides a bowl of Fruity Pebbles over there, Brian?
Anything at all.
No. Who cooks in your house?
My wife. I do breakfast. I do scrambled eggs, but I try to fool my kids. I put things like bananas and cinnamon in there and try to mess them up.
I used to be able to cook a little bit. I can make really good. This is not particularly sophisticated. It just takes a little bit of time, but I can make really good sweet potato fries from scratch.
Yeah,
I can do that pretty well. So that's about. I mean, I can cook. I can on the grill. You guys know your way around a grill, right?
Yeah,
I can cook on steaks, chicken grill,
yeah.
all that kind of stuff. Yeah. All right. So Danny wins. What's next? Do you ever see MMA as an Olympic sport, Danny?
No.
Why?
It's just rough. I mean, boxing has in Olympic they have the headgear.
No, they took it out. They took it out. Yep. They did historically, but
yeah. I don't know. MMA is just there's so many things that happen. I mean, we just look at this year. How many times have the cards changed? And also, like, I think it'd be very problematic who'd be representing who. You know what I'm saying? Tons of international fighters come here and train in the U.S. So what you train out of Greg Jackson's, you train out of the U.S., but you're representing, I don't know,
Brazil.
Brazil. It doesn't really make much sense. And I think actually, if any martial art has a chance to make it into the Olympics, it'd probably be jiu-jitsu first, then MMA. I think it's a little bit more controlled, and I think guys train usually where they live, right? Although there's a lot of jiu-jitsu guys here in the U.S. as well. But I think if anything, jiu-jitsu is the next thing.
I would actually say, okay, it's funny you mentioned that. The very first big story that I wrote for MMA Fighting years ago, God, how long ago was this? 2011 or something, was a story called Mat Zero. Like, why isn't jiu-jitsu in the Olympics? And the basic answer is that I'd actually say MMA has a better chance as an amateur variety. Like, you're right, the professional side, it's not possible.
Yeah, you cannot fight that.
There's no chance. On the amateur side, maybe, but
no elbows.
You're right in the sense that jiu-jitsu is more like, you look at it like, that's ready-made for the Olympics, right? But the problem is that it's a for-profit sport, and in order for it to become regulated in the way that it would need to and have the oversight to be a part of the Olympic movement, it would essentially have that element removed from it. And you can imagine all of the schools and the brands that make a nice, pretty penny off that, they don't want to let that go. So I don't think it ever will be. Boys? Any contributions?
I can't imagine. Honestly, we've talked about this periodically. It's always kind of fun to revisit it and see if your mind changes on this, but I still don't see a scenario where MMA makes it into the Olympics. There's just too much, there'd be too much, there is too much of a chaotic factor to it. I just don't think that you'd be able to, if you started to take away from it, it starts to fail to be MMA.
That's a great point. The violence hurdle, public image is bad, and then the recovery from injury. Boxing, you can put on headgear. I know it's off now, but they do, 3-round fights. So you can recover from that.
It's not.
There's no elbows, no need for the face.
Are you going to do a 5-minute MMA fight and then judge it? I don't think so.
There is, God, what part of the games was it? I don't know what kind of games they were in, but Sambo Steve, who's a big guy here in New York City, he was training a team in combat wrestling, which is a sort of like catch wrestling. It's like, so there are.
Is it a lot like combat jiu-jitsu?
Except, I mean, jiu-jitsu, of course, you play guard. In the combat wrestling, it's like wrestling. Like, you don't want to go to your back, and there's a lot of basing out, but there's submissions as well. A lot of bulldog chokes, ankle locks, that kind of thing. And he fielded a team that just got regulated. I forget by which oversight body, but that might be a possibility. I can see that. You wear shoes and that, that kind of thing. So, all right, keep going here. All right, Brian, if you could choose only one of the below, which would it be? Number one, no more Reebok, go back to traditional model. All fight cards on a streaming platform. All cards on Eastern time zone. I think they mean like at a time like, conducive to us. Less interim belt fights and super fights. No more USADA, no more Face the Pain. You can only choose one.
They had me until that Face the Pain. I knew where I was going. And I'm like, oh, man. And
what do you think?
I'm an East Coast guy. That 8 p.m. Eastern Fox main card time is the best thing ever. The only thing better than it is covering a fight in Vegas and waking up the next morning and watching NFL football at like whatever time that it happens, and you just feel like, wow, that's how the other half lives.
There's really nothing more preposterous than a 1 a.m. main event.
For boxing and MMA, again, we use the word archaic, and by we, I mean me a lot in the show. It's archaic to start these fights at 1 a.m. or 12:30. I know you do it to get past college football in a lot of cases, but can we get off Saturday nights? You're telling me a giant UFC card wouldn't work on a Thursday night? Everybody's home on Thursdays.
Contender Series seems to be done
quite well,
Can
we put the thing back up one more time to see what we can...
I would go with the same one, though.
Here we go.
Those 10 p.m. start times on a Fox... from my understanding, the ESPN is going to follow a similar kind of path on this, but the 10 p.m. start time...
I'm told it'll be a lot better.
Okay, well, I hope that that's the case, because that...
I think it might still start at 10.
Well, sounds like my wish came true, then.
I think it might still start at 10, but rather than 6, it'll be 5.
Yeah.
And I'm told the shows on ESPN Plus will go like that.
That's awesome. I really hope that that's the case, because I realized it over time, because, we talk about this, there's no off-season, there's events all the time, and if you work in this industry, or if you're just a fan, you like to watch these fights, it's a long time to stay up. And I know that every time we complain on the East Coast, the Europeans then come at us and like, oh yeah, we'll try watching it at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. or whatever it is, and I'm like, I understand that too.
They get us back during the Olympics. Don't worry about it. They get us back.
But that is it is problematic when you're trying to stay awake for a main event that you're supposed to be most hyped for. You know what I mean?
Well, they really get us back with soccer, because when I was in Europe and I was watching soccer at night, that was amazing. I'd rather watch soccer at 7.
How late was it?
I remember watching soccer at like 8 p.m., 7 p.m. Rather than here at 2 p.m. You're at work, so you got computer on the side and whatnot.
So the list is here. If you could take one out.
I like watching you suffer sometimes, so I'll keep Face the Pain.
Yeah, I'll keep it.
And I will go with Reebok, man. I mean, I had an article come out a while ago, because for those who don't remember, Alex Caceres, he's one of the most unique fighters. He would always come out with, a samurai hat and whatnot. And I interviewed him because he had a long layoff. So Reebok took place, and he hadn't fought for the UFC in a bit, and he was coming back, and he was stepping into that Reebok era. And I talked to him, and he's like, man, they killed the personality. Like, how am I supposed to express myself if I'm being marginalized and I have these rules that I can't do this, I can't do that?
I think it's fair to say that something did happen when they started to all come out homogenized in a similar look, didn't it? I mean, I just feel like something about that is very weird. I didn't know it would matter. I honestly did not know it would matter to me, but it does. Over the course of time, you just wanted to see their personalities that way.
Yeah, and Brian, you might know this very well because of pro wrestling. MMA does have an element to it, and it's about expressing yourself, right?
Even boxing, Regis Prograis came out as the Rougarou in his last fight with his big in New Orleans, and he had this band that came out with him, and like it looked like a Mardi Gras parade. Like, that's huge.
I know.
And that's how you remember
mask, things like that. Like there was so much of that back in the day. It made it part of the festivity. It was like part of the
fighters become more memorable.
Ritualistic. Yeah. Now it's that ritual is
We learned a lesson. Don't go corporate, bro. Right? Don't ever shave. Don't ever join the Yankees. Like, you just express yourself.
Don't ever root for Real Madrid.
People want real.
I would say from that list, I think you guys know where I'm going to go with this. No more USADA. I am. Let me give a shout out to a podcast.
You really hate USADA. I don't the pain.
I do not.
That's the real testament.
I do not hate these people. I don't know them enough to hate them, but we disagree about a worldview. Let me give a shout out, if I can, to a podcast made by the CBC. It was made last year called On Drugs, and it was. There's been a second season of it, and it's essentially about exploration of human life in the world of drugs. And what that means is, how does drugs affect pain management? How does drug affect people who want to study? How does drug affect sex? How does drug affect our appreciation of art? How does drug affect sports? Any number of ways in which drugs can affect your life, it's an exploration of that. And inside of it, once you begin to realize and study the history of drug use in humanity, and by the way, when I say drug use, I mean caffeine intake, by the way. Caffeine's a really important part. It goes back to many, many centuries ago on the border of Guatemala and Mexico. And there's a huge history behind all of these kinds of things. What you begin to realize is the human condition is intertwined inextricably with drug use. And when you then go and look at what our sport is, which is essentially the destruction of the human body, and we can't find enough room for nuance that we can tip the scales towards any kind of medical treatment for a sport where the sole object is the cutting of skin, is the breaking of bones, is the concussing of brains, is the damaging of organs. It is insane. It is outrageous that we think that that is a good idea. It is a terrible idea. It will carry long-term consequences, and we need no more of it.
This editorial does not necessarily represent the views of the other on this panel. No,
it will.
You want to block your estrogen, go for it.
Here's what I know. Here's what I know. There's so many people who disagree with me. Come find me in 20 years when I have won this argument. I guarantee.
Cash me outside. How about that?
Yeah, right? How about that? Bad Bobby. All right, let's go. That's it. We're done. Hey, we're done. Look at that. All right, look at that. Right on time.
You are good at this.
I am fairly decent at this job. Okay. Really thank everybody for watching. You guys are the best. We have the whole crew out in LA. Lots of stuff coming your way, so don't go anywhere. Keep it locked to MMA Fighting. Like the video, subscribe below. We always appreciate that when you do. You know what? Chuck and Danny, you did a good job, and Brian, you were here. You were here.
You were here.
Yeah, you were here.
Hey, no, you did a great job. It was good having you.
I was hot for a second until that Brock Lesnar joke. All downhill.
It's fine. Believe me, it's fine. Anything you want to plug to the audience from CBS Sports?
I cover pro wrestling, boxing, and MMA for CBS Sports. The In This Corner podcast with Brian Campbell 3 times a week, one in each sport. The great King Mo Lawal on the MMA show with me every week. Don't miss it.
Yes, it's very, very good. So I highly encourage you to check it out. And if you're ever at a show, you can see him on the road as well. He's out at basically all of them. What's the next show you're covering?
That would be Gennady Golovkin against Canelo Alvarez.
I will see you there.
But before that, I'll be at SummerSlam in Brooklyn. You better believe that. He won't.
And you sicken me. All right. For Chuck and Brian and Danny, I'm Luke. Hands up, chin down, let him fly. This is the MMA Beat.